Hello adventurers, welcome back to the tavern. Today we will be discussing what I think is one of the most important tools in your bag, the Session Zero. This is by far one of the easiest ways to root out any problems you might face in the coming campaign, to head off any problems that players might have amongst each other, as well as with you or your campaign. It's a character creation, setting primer, and safety tool all rolled up into one. Before we get any further into talking about how to actually run a Session Zero, let's talk a little bit more about how to prepare for one. If you are running a module or setting, make sure that you read through the source material completely before starting, and know what you want to change or what you want to keep the same before you run your Session Zero. If you are running a homebrew setting, I like to have the setting mostly completed with some small details still need to be added. Now this doesn't have to be an entire world worth of content. Don't stop yourself from playing because you haven't thought about what a city on the other side of the world is doing, unless it's somewhere that your players will be exploring soon. My usual rule of thumb is to have the starting village or town be the most detailed and then sort of work out from there, and then move down in priority based on where the players will be going next. I personally like to play and run a more sandbox style game, so I try to use a surrounding area lens, taking session breaks if needed if the players decide they're going to an area that I haven't spent as much time on. If you are more of a railroad style GM, you can just complete as much track in front of the party as you need. Maybe the next few sessions are planned out, but you have enough space that if you need to pivot, you can. I usually run my Session Zero when I've completed about 25 to 30% of the setting and story my players will be involved in, because of course I want to include my players' backstory into the game. If you are running a module and all you complete beforehand is just reading through the campaign setting, that's not necessarily wrong. I would try to subtly change things to include the players a little bit more, but in some modules this can be a little difficult, like in my go-to example, Curse of Strahd. In this campaign, the entire point is to be an outsider that's lured into the land of Barovia, so it wouldn't make much sense to be connected in that way. However, even in this example, we could raise the stakes a little bit. Maybe our Monster Hunter Ranger, who's on a quest to find their missing partner, finds out they were actually captured or killed by Strahd. Next, I personally use one tool every time I complete a Session Zero, and that is pre-game questionnaires. I send out a couple of these before any Session Zero to sort of gauge where my players are at. This goes from safety tools like lines and veils, to more game-specific questions like what type of adventure are you looking for? Do you enjoy combat or roleplay more? Do you like puzzles or stealth missions? And of course, who is willing to be note-taker? All of this can lend a little more insight into what you should even be thinking about when it comes to potential quests or storylines. I also want to take a second and talk about what I just mentioned, which are safety tools. Specifically in this case, we're talking about lines and veils. This is a system that will let your players tell you what type of content they are comfortable with at the table. I use a simple questionnaire form and give it to my players before anything else, and try to keep it updated in case people's feelings change. The way this will work is you'll have a series of sensitive topics, and these will be things like romance, violence, sickness, and more. You will rate these from either a hard line, meaning that you don't ever want to broach this topic, to a veil, which would mean that that topic can be discussed but not shown explicitly, and finally to being open to a topic and being willing to explore it. I also include an additional notes section, so if my players have anything specific they'd like to discuss, they can let me know there, and we can set up a time to meet face to face. This is also a good time and place to mention to your players the subjects that will be inherent to your game, such as violence, which is often a big part of TTRPGs, but doesn't have to be. These types of pre-game primers can really get your players into the headspace of your game. If you are playing a post-apocalypse setting and one of your players shows up with a troubadour that's famous for being all over the world and touring, that won't make much sense. Instead, if they're set on this type of character, maybe they're famous in their settlement, but they have an aspiration to be the vision of a world-touring bard. Now, this can really highlight the themes of the setting, of what was lost and what the hope for the future is. Finally, let's get into what we came here to talk about. You are sitting down with your players to your Session Zero. What do you do now? Well, there are many different ways to go about this. Many like to bring ideas of characters to the session already formed, but I personally like to do most of the character building in the Session Zero. I don't mind if players show up with an idea or a vibe that they're trying to capture, but I always remind them not to hold on to any ideas too tightly. Never let your players make a character in a vacuum without any information. They will most likely not fit the vibe of the campaign, and will tend to lean on things like being a wanderer from another land when they don't have you or the other players as support. Begin your session 0 by giving your players a primer on the setting that they're going to be playing in. Here's an example from the Beast Feast campaign in the Daggerheart Core rulebook. The rustic, peaceful village of Elmore sits atop the Plover Caves, a labyrinth system of caverns full of dangerous and delectable creatures. When the powerful magic keeping the villagers safe begins to fail, the bravest among them will descend into the caves to save the day. In a Beast Feast campaign, you'll play everyday heroes diving into the Plover Caves to reignite the magic lure that lies in its depths, and cook up delicious meals. Welcome to the culinary world of zoophagous delight, where the beasts you fight become the food you eat. This is a great example of a succinct few sentences your players can use as a jumping off point for making their characters. I honestly feel that Daggerheart's campaign frame system is such a win, and communicates everything a player and a GM need to know to get started running a game. Look out for a full Daggerheart review coming out soon, and make sure to subscribe for that and other TTRPG videos as soon as they are released. Once you've given your players a starting prompt, I would try to give them as much information about the vibe of your campaign as well. Do you have a strong theme like corruption or noir mystery? Let your players know so that it's in the front of their mind while they're making their characters. Another easy way to achieve this is something like a mood board, communicating your theme through images of similar media. As an example, a classical fantasy game might have images from Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. Give your players as much information about the setting they find themselves in and the themes that you want to communicate. My next step would be to break down the setting more granularly, starting with their hometown and the places that they live. Remember that in your narrative, these are characters that existed before the story started being told, so give them something that they're a part of. I will go more in depth about how to make a good fantasy town in a future video, but here we will talk about a few things that should help you run a better session 0. When I create a town or city, I like to think about a few major things first. What are the demographics of the town? And is there a species that this is their ancestral place? For example, my last campaign starting town was founded by a noble family of Dragonborn, and Dragonborn made up about 40% of the population. This doesn't always have to be the case, and other cities in the same campaign had a thorough mix of all species. This could be a point of interest or lore that lets your players experience that culture. Next, I like to think about the government structure. Is your town looked after by an elected mayor? Or is it run by a feudal lord? Do they have any officials under them? And to that point, you should think about if your town has a standing guard or not. This will come up often with adventurers running around. Finally, I decide on the town's major exports or industries. I know this sounds gritty, but it can add a very strong theme. For example, a town that's focused on making arms and armor is a very different theme to a town that's focused on the brewing and selling of ale. If you don't want to theme your town as heavily as this, you can make it more of a trading hub and immersed in commerce in general. All of this will influence your players' character-making decisions pretty heavily, so give it a fair bit of thought. You could even go a step further by making your players part of an organization, like a Monster Hunters Guild or a Merchants Association, to ingrain them further in the town. Ultimately, it'll be up to your players, and it will depend on their experience level and their comfort with being more involved. I would encourage them to participate more and have high ambitions for their character. But if you are having a hard time with getting them to engage with that side, you can even go as far as offering them some story/RP suggestions that would help them engage to their comfort level. So much of this will be about good, effective communication, and you as the GM will have to guide that in the right direction. Give the players as much information as you can to help them fit into your vision for the story, but ultimately, you should let them run wild with ideas and try to fit those as best as you can. This is ultimately why we only take our story so far, as our players will help guide us in the direction that they are interested in. Of course, once session 0 is finished and your players have made their characters, you can go on shaping that story. Once you have all this information, it's time to actually start making the characters. Whether you are playing D&D, Blades in the Dark, or Kids on Bike, there are rules and guidelines to making characters. This is usually in the form of an official rulebook that will guide you, but there are so many other options that can help your players. from instructional videos, and keep an eye out for those coming out in the future, to digital tools that will make the process an easy-to-follow set of windows. I personally use Roll20 with some official content unlocked, and find the character creation wizard to be very helpful for new players in both D&D and Daggerheart. During character creation, try to remind your players about their vision for their character, and not as much on the rules and optimization, unless that's something that's important to that player. The rules really can take care of themselves in most games. You are using their guidelines to make your character anyway, so I feel like the vision is more important in that moment. Too often I see players getting lost in what ability is best, instead of what ability accentuates their character the most. Finally, there is the big ask of your players: backstory. I would emphasize that you don't need a lot. Maybe a page or so of detailed history is enough to jump in as a DM. The thing to remember is, the more that they give you, the more you can give back to them. You get out what you put into it, and you can even tell your players as such. If a player is having a hard time getting started, many systems have some inbuilt background primers, like D&D's personality traits, ideals, flaws, and bonds. This can be a good jumping off point, but I would provide maybe 5 to 6 questions to each player based on the type of game that they wanted to play. If your players wanted an RP heavy game, maybe ask what secrets they might have, or some rumors that exist about their characters that you can give to the other players. If it's a Monster Hunter themed game, how did they get into the trade? Was their family also involved? Are they still around? These types of questions may not have even occurred to your player to include in their backstory, and will probably spark a line of thinking about their characters that they didn't have before. These questions can also be specifically about the campaign that you have in mind, maybe involving an organization that's associated with or run by your future BBEG. Speaking of connections, I like to use these types of questions to spark up a connection to one of the other players before they all team up together. This makes the table feel more dynamic immediately, and gives some players reason to spark up RP together, and gets scenes rolling. Daggerheart does a great job of this with their character creation system of connections. These are a few unique questions that are included on each class page. You are intended to ask these questions of another party member from the perspective of your character. Some examples of these are: what favor have I asked of you that you're not sure you can fulfill? Or, what animal do I say you remind me of? And, what promise did you make me agree to should you die on the battlefield? These questions and answers spark a little ember of roleplay between two characters, and calling back to it will have an impact on the rest of the party. Curiosity is an excellent motivator to the shy player at the table. Give the opportunity for small RP moments, and you will be surprised at how willing most are to jump into a scene with the boost from these small questions. Here is where I would include any alternate character creation guidelines, like a starting magic item or feat in D&D, or any specific rules to your world. If the world your players are in has some sort of magical disease that everyone is aware of, give them some rules so that they better understand that mechanic. Ultimately, the Session Zero is a powerful tool if used correctly. Many see it as the easiest session to run, and don't put much stock into it or skip it entirely. But I would argue you should be preparing for your Session Zero as much, if not more, than all of your other sessions. I personally prepare quite a bit of material before running a Session Zero for a long-form campaign, and use it as the basis for most of my plot for the rest of the game. Of course, things change and you'll have to change with them, but if you follow the steps that I laid out, you will have more than enough information to make a great story with your players. If you've made it this far, consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. I have been your Tavern Keeper, and I hope to see you in the tavern again soon. Stay safe, adventurer.